seen what we have seen. And then I come to this place of my ancestors. And I remember, like these blossoms, we are all dying. To know life in every breath, every cup of tea, every life we take, the way of the warrior. Life in every breath. That is Bushido.
Hey guys, and welcome to another video. So today I'm going to be reviewing Gate to Kagoshima by Poppy Kuroki. So let's get into this. So first of all, this was from my February TBR list, part of my Pens and Paperbacks podcast with my cousin. I think I started it on the very last day of January, on the 31st, but I've basically been reading it in February, and today is the 6th for me, February 6th, because I haven't gone to bed yet, so it's literally been like 7 days. It's been a week. So a little bit of background. This book is written by my friend Poppy Kuroki, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name. I promise I'm learning Japanese on Duolingo. It's just not sticking very well. But she is a really good author friend of mine, and she's actually the person who edited the Japanese section of Immortal, for cultural and historical mistakes and stuff like that. So we used to talk a little bit about our stories when we were writing them, and she's like, this book was doing so well, like it got so big, I think it was right ahead or right behind Outlander, which is like the most famous time traveling romance in existence right now, both the book and the TV show. And I'm a huge fan of the TV show, and I really do want to read the books eventually. But the difference is it's a time traveling romance, but it's set in Japan instead of Scotland, like an Outlander. And specifically, it is set during the time of the Satsuma Rebellion, which is in 1877, so it's about 10 years after the events that take place in my book Immortal, for a portion of it. So 10 years after the Boshin War. Whew. Okay, so if you know anything about Japanese culture, literature, stories, storytelling, if you know anything about their history, and if you know anything about their stories and storytelling, then you know that death is a huge theme, and tragedy, that's the thing. So I went into this expecting the worst. So also, can I just say how absolutely gorgeous this book is? Like, I was so proud to own this book. I am still, but like every time I would pick it up to read it, I would just be so happy and excited because it's just such a gorgeous book. And I am fond of the American version, although it's because it is released in the UK. And I was so excited that my bookmark was actually a pink bookmark because it matched. Like, the aesthetic is amazing. And the one day of spring weather we had, oh, it was perfect. It just didn't last. So one of the thing is, I've been in like a fantasy mood, and this is historical, so there was kind of a difference there for me. I really enjoyed this book, and it is like the best historical romance that I've ever read, and it's definitely my favorite. And I would argue that if I read Outlander, I probably like this better just because it takes place in Japan during a time that I am extremely passionate about, that I've learned a lot about and spend a lot of time researching, over Scotland, when, even though I am super passionate about Scotland, it's just like the Japanese stuff of this is so good. I really enjoyed a lot of the cultural stuff. Like, there's one scene that I remember in this book after she time travels and she's back in time and she's getting into kind of a routine, and she's working with a lot of the women. And at the end of the day, they all go into an onsen together, which is basically like the hot springs, but they bathe. It's like public baths. And so the idea that culturally they have public baths, one side for them, like one area for the men and one area for the women, where it's like they just take baths together and they gossip and everything else. And it's very weird for like an American like me, because it's like we have privacy and all that stuff. But it just showed a lot about their culture. And then it was also like, she's the foreigner and she's from Scotland and has red hair, so that was also kind of an interesting tidbit, because Outlander is a time traveling romance set in Scotland, and then this character character is a time-traveling romance set in Japan, but she's from Scotland, so it's really interesting. But because she's a foreigner with red hair, they kind of like ostracized her and treated her like an outcast at first, which is culturally accurate and stuff in some cases. And it was one of those things where like on top of the public bathing and the gossip, it's like she was kind of isolated. But I loved that she grew and that she got close with several of the side characters. It is a romance, so there is a couple of spicy scenes, but they're very like at the very, very end, and the spicy scene was like, it's still written like, how should I put this, in a way that resembles like Japan and Japanese style of like writing, even though it's in English, obviously, and it does have a lot of like Japanese terms and stuff like that. And it brought up the fact that like historical Japanese, like that takes place back in this time period, 1877 and earlier, is like a different form of Japanese that like really hard, like it's really different from modern Japanese. So that's kind of a cool little tidbit that was brought up. And because she's learned modern Japanese, she only speaks a little bit of the like medieval Japanese. And so that was a nice little tidbit. But so the romance, there is a few spicy scenes at the end, but for me it's like it's put in one kind of a poetic, kind of more delicate way than like, you know, a romantic-y spicy scene. And it was such that I didn't really have to skip it, because it was like, it happened, like it was very brief, it was very delicately put, it was earned because they had gotten to know one another and had gone through this whole friendship. There is some drama in the middle with like, you know, typical romance kind of style drama that was nice, on top of the fact that like you had the rebellion and stuff. At first it was like peaceful and just everyday life, and it was kind of slow, not really like bad slow, because it showed a lot culturally, but at first I was like, is it gonna have the rebellion? But the last like 150 pages or so, 200 pages really, started picking up the war and the rebellion. And I really do like admire the fact that this book shows the war, and not only the Satsuma Rebellion War, but the reality of war, and that it's not pretty, it's not romantic, there's nothing glorious or special about war and death and blood. And the concept of like the war and the rebellion, and how do I put this, like sometimes concepts with historical stuff can be romanticized, like, oh, the rebellion happened and it's for this wonderful big great cause, and like all this epic amazing stuff happens, but the reality is that like it's a lot simpler than that, and men die for a lot of reasons. And I loved like learning about, because this is 10 years after the part that I spent, you know, 7 years of my life working on in Immortal, so it was interesting to learn more about the aftermath of that. And in fact, at first I was like, okay, this is the Satsuma clan, they were the enemies of the Shinsengumi, and I don't like you guys, which was just kind of a funny thought. But it's like you get to know the fact that like they fought and bled for this emperor, and to put him into power, only to be betrayed, essentially. And it's literally like the same thing with the Shinsengumi. They fought and bled for the shogun, they were later betrayed, it screwed them over and they all died, and it's kind of the same thing here. So I will say the ending had a surprise and a twist that I didn't see coming, and I thought I saw, like I assumed I knew what it was, and then the twist ending came, and so then I tried to predict the whole, like the rest of the twist, and it had kind of something else that I wasn't expecting in with it. And then the epilogue kind of changed up the perspective of who we went to and didn't really explain a whole lot, and so that was the epilogue for me was a little disappointing, even though the epilogue had something in it that was kind of cute and sentimental and stuff. It still felt like it wasn't, some things were not explained clear enough to be fully satisfying, if that makes sense. I don't think it's enough to dock a star, because as I said, I went into this expecting the worst, given that it's probably going to be tragic, but it's technically a romance, and romance can't really end tragically, so I was wondering how it was going to reconcile all of that. And yeah, overall it's weird to call this a cozy read because there's really not, like, it's not cozy because it deals with war and death and violence and blood, and there's a lot of fighting and tragedy and death and all that stuff. But for like a Japanese historical romance, it's kind of cozy. And there's a lot of cute little moments between the main characters, Isha and Keshiro, and I liked the time traveling thing. I was waiting for the reveal moment when she told him that, like, you know, that's kind of like a trope in time traveling romances. It's like, oh, when are they going to tell him? You know, when is the truth going to get revealed? And I gotta say, I was surprised when it happened, and it kind of seemed random, but it ended up being like, okay, I can accept that kind of thing. Yeah, and honestly, it leaves you kind of wanting more, not necessarily like more kind of from these characters, but also just more of these type of books from this author. Because I gotta say, this author, like, as if I don't know her, because I gotta say, like, Poppy really wrote this book really well, and the writing style matched, like, the Japanese way of speaking, but like in English, if that makes any sense. And I just like, it felt like Japan. It felt like, you know, reading this time period, everybody, like, the way that they spoke, the way that they thought, their personalities, like how the words were written in the actual book, felt that way. There was a lot of historical, I loved that it was so historically accurate, because it's the same war that's featured in The Last Samurai, but that one has a lot of historical inaccuracies. So it was interesting, like, one of the things was pointed out, like, in this book, that I realized, oh, okay, that's different than what, it was the detail in this one that, oh, what's his name? The main guy in the rebellion, Saigo Takamori, or whatever his name is. My mind randomly went blank, but the main guy never actually did make it to talk to the emperor. Like, he never made it to Tokyo and never actually had a chance to talk to the emperor to explain everything and try to negotiate peace. And in The Last Samurai, like, they do feature him going to Tokyo, talking to the emperor, and in the movie they have to where it just doesn't work out, but like, historically speaking, he never did go back. And that's just like one thing among many that wasn't historically accurate about that, but it was still a good movie. But this was like, had so many historical details, and I loved how at the end she has like a glossary. She has an author's note I'm actually kind of interested to read. She has like the historical timeline, like dates of when things took place. She has the family tree of the main character. She's got some fun facts. She's got a map of battles in the beginning and a glossary and stuff. So there's a lot of like details and effort that she put into this book that I really, really do appreciate. My star rating for this book, I think, is going to be 4.5 stars. There was a part of me that like got obsessed in a way that like, I want to keep reading, and I'm excited to keep reading. And that aspect was like 5-star for me, but it's still like historical romance, which is not my main genre to read. My main genre is fantasy. And so it's like not quite as like, you know, I wasn't quite as obsessive as I would have been with a true like fantasy, if that makes sense. And it's nothing against the book. So 4.5 stars. But it's a very, very good book, and I love it. And I genuinely don't have any complaints other than the epilogue. And like, I wish that there was a little bit more of an explanation at the end. So spoiler talk, if you don't want to be here, skip to this time and all this stuff. But what I'm referring to about the ending was obviously the main couple. She decides to go back and die with him because he can't leave, which I need to talk about the whole samurai aspect in a minute. But so they're gonna die together, and he gets shot, and so she's trying to help him, and then the storm comes and the gate appears for her to go back, and he pushes her to go back to her time, so she does. And the ending kind of reminds me of Barbie and the Nutcracker, if you've ever seen that, which is funny. But and then back in modern times, we go to this guy that she met at the coffee shop, and it's like he's having these dreams of her over these 9 months, and he has the same memories as the main guy, Kechiro. The coffee shop guy is named Kesuke, which is one of my character names in my other books, but that's beside the point. And so she ends up in the hospital because she got hit by a car, and so he shows up and talks to her and is like, hey, we had coffee together, and you know, this is going to sound weird, but I've been dreaming of you. And that's where it ends. And then in the epilogue, we go back to her ancestors that she met and had this whole storyline with, and it kind of shows their story and their happy ending and stuff. And it's like, is he reincarnated? Like, we didn't really have an explanation as to whether it was him, whether it wasn't him, if it was just this coffee guy dreaming of him. So so she still has a guy that she can end up with, or if he was actually like Ketro's soul reincarnated. Like, there was no actual explanation, and I wish it had one. So you can come back now if you don't want spoilers. But talking about that ending reminded me of another aspect that I love about this book and Japanese like samurai culture and the samurai in general. One, they all fought and for the cause that they believed in, their lord, which was the Saigo Takamori guy, and then the other side, the Imperials, were fighting for the honor of their emperor. So everybody fights and like is loyal to the end, to like the cause or the person that they're fighting for. But the other thing is, like, at one point they're in the war and Ketro wants to go back home because a secret is revealed about his sister and he needs to know the truth. And so he goes back home, gets the truth, and then that's when the spicy scene takes place between him and Isla. And he is broken, like it breaks him, and he is rattled with guilt over being there while his comrades, the other samurai, are like fighting and dying for this lost cause, because at this point he knows the truth. And the idea, first of all, feels like my heart was just clenching every time that those scenes were coming up. So good job, Poppy, because that was a really well written section. But so eventually he ends up going back to the war and knowing that he and everybody involved in it is going to die, and Isla comes with him because she loves him. And the concept, I love that she brought out the concept of samurai and how they were not cowards and they would rather die for what they believed than run or retreat or give up. And this whole concept of the guilt of living life as a coward, even living life with the woman that he loved and having this peaceful life, the guilt would eventually eat away at him until he wouldn't be the same man anymore, and he couldn't live with himself. And that's why he had to go back, and he would rather die with his comrades than live a happy life with the woman that he loves. And he genuinely does love her, and it creates this really complicated like aspect of his character, but it's how the samurai were. And I just love that she brought that out so well in this book. And I genuinely loved this book, and I think I'm actually going to rate it 5 stars, just because even though it's not a genre I would typically read, and for me it's like a 5-star historical romance is different than a 5-star fantasy like Onyx Storm, but Poppy just does such a good job with this war, the rebellion, the romance. Even the ending, despite that it was a little disappointing, was still like being true to history while making it as much of a romance as possible. And that's all I'll say. 5-star read for me. I can never start to say this. For some reason, my speech impediment gets in the way. Anyways, 5-star read for me. Gate to Kagoshima by Poppy Kuroki. Have you read it? If so, what do you think? And if not, what are you doing with your life? You have to read this book. It's so good. Highly recommended. As I said, there's one... I think there's a mini spicy scene after that, and there's kind of an intense makeout scene that's a little steamy but not spicy. But there's one spicy scene. It's very brief. It's kind of poetically written, and it's toward the end, and you kind of see it coming. So, but yeah, if you like this video, please be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more writing and reading videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And in the meantime, if you like my review of Gate to Kagoshima by Poppy Kuroki, then check out my review of Earthquaking by H.A. Pruitt. She's another author friend of mine, and I really enjoyed that book as well, so check it out. You don't want to miss it.